1944.
D-Day, the beginning of the toughest 26 days in Marine Corps history.
A 52-year-old general stepped onto a volcano and knew he would never leave it alive. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had just landed on the 8-square-mile island of Iwo Jima. He looked at the black sand, smelled sulfur pouring from the earth, and understood instantly Japan had sent him to die. He once wrote, "America is too strong to fight." But now he was ordered to defend this rock to the last man. What he built beneath the island would turn into the most brutal battle in Marine Corps history. Subscribe to No Man's Land for more untold Pacific War stories. June 19, 1944. A transport plane touched down on a runway made of volcanic ash. The moment Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi stepped onto Iwo Jima, he knew the island would be his grave. The heat was suffocating. Black sand coated everything. Mount Suribachi towered to the south like a dark warning. Kuribayashi was 52 years old, a career officer, and he carried orders personally signed by Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. Defend this island to the last man. According to his wife, Yoshi, he had already said, "Not even my ashes will return." This assignment was both a privilege and a death sentence. Days earlier, he had been granted a rare private audience with Emperor Hirohito. Yet many historians believe he was selected not for honor, but because Tokyo's military leadership wanted him gone. Kuribayashi had once served as deputy military attaché in the United States. From 1928 to 1930, he toured American factories, studied at Harvard, and saw the power of U.S. industry firsthand. He wrote home, "America is the last country Japan should fight. Its industrial strength is beyond imagination." In a time when Japanese doctrine glorified spirit over resources, such realism made him dangerous. Hardline officers saw him as weak-minded. Some believed sending him to Iwo Jima, alone and outnumbered, was a way to silence him. He understood that Japan's tides had already turned against them. But when handed the order to defend Iwo Jima at all costs, he accepted without hesitation. For him, duty came before survival. The island sat 750 miles south of Tokyo, directly in the path of incoming American bombers from the Marianas. Kuribayashi immediately knew one thing. He could not win, but he could delay. If his sacrifice bought even a single day of protection for Japan's mainland, then, in his words, it would be worth one more day for our children. He stepped forward onto the ash, knowing full well he was walking into history as a man already dead. To understand why Kuribayashi accepted certain death, you have to understand why this tiny island mattered so much. Iwo Jima was only 8 square miles of volcanic rock, but its location made it one of the most valuable pieces of land in the entire Pacific War. It sat halfway between the American bases in the Mariana Islands and the Japanese mainland, right along the flight path of B-29 Super Fortress bombers heading north to strike Tokyo and other major cities. Japan used Iwo Jima as an early warning post. 3 airfields on the island allowed Japanese fighter planes to intercept incoming bombers long before they reached home soil. Radar units positioned there could spot American aircraft hours in advance and alert mainland defenses. As long as Iwo Jima stayed in Japanese hands, bombing missions faced constant danger and limited fighter escort support. But if the Americans took Iwo Jima, everything changed. Damaged bombers returning from raids could land safely instead of crashing into the sea. P-51 Mustang fighters could launch from there and escort bombers all the way to Japan, something they couldn't do from the Marianas due to range limits. The island would also serve as a staging ground for troop and supply movement in preparation for a future invasion of Japan itself. Kuribayashi studied American capabilities more than almost any officer in the Japanese army. He knew the United States had far greater industrial and fuel resources. He knew that if the Americans could stage operations from Iwo Jima, Japan's mainland would no longer have breathing room. Losing the island meant exposing the heart of the empire. He accepted that he couldn't stop the Americans from taking Iwo Jima. Their aircraft, naval strength, and logistical power dwarfed anything he had. But he believed he could force them to pay so heavily in blood that it might delay the invasion of Japan. In one of his final letters, he wrote, "If our children can live safely for just one more day, then one more day defending this island will have meaning." He was not fighting for victory. He was fighting for time. And time was all Japan had left. Kuribayashi's first act as commander was to reject everything the Japanese military had taught for decades. Standard doctrine said, defend at the water's edge, meet the enemy the moment they land, and die gloriously in a final charge if necessary. That strategy had failed at Tarawa, where beach defenses were wiped out before Marines even stepped ashore. It failed again at Saipan, where thousands died in futile banzai attacks that barely slowed the American advance. Kuribayashi understood that repeating those tactics on Iwo Jima would be suicide with no purpose. So he issued radical new orders. No defenses concentrated on the beach, no banzai charges, no pointless sacrifice. Instead, he would build a fortress underground and force the Americans to fight their way inch by inch across the island. He wanted every position hardened, every approach covered by crossfire, every tunnel connected to another. If the Americans landed unopposed, they would move forward with confidence. And that's when he would strike. He told his officers, "Let them land, then kill them after they are trapped." It was a complete break from the Japanese warrior code that glorified frontal attacks. His strategy was purely tactical. Survive the bombardment, fight from depth, inflict maximum casualties, and delay Japan's defeat as long as possible. To make this work, Kuribayashi ordered 25% of his total manpower to excavation duty, despite objections from officers who wanted more training time. He insisted that digging mattered more than drills. Naval guns and bombers could level the surface, but tunnels carved deep into volcanic rock could absorb the blows. He studied terrain, marked artillery positions hidden behind ridges, and ordered defensive lines that allowed for fallback fighting through multiple layers. Many junior officers believed he was abandoning the samurai spirit. He responded simply, "Spirit alone cannot stop shells." Kuribayashi did not prepare Iwo Jima as a battlefield. He prepared it as a trap, a place where thousands of Americans would expect a quick victory, but instead find hell waiting underground. The work that followed pushed soldiers beyond their limits. Under Kuribayashi's supervision, Iwo Jima became one of the most heavily fortified positions in the Pacific. Japanese engineers and labor battalions were ordered to turn the volcanic rock into an underground fortress. Every day, thousands of men dug with picks, hammers, and sometimes bare hands through scorching temperatures that reached up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit inside the tunnels. There was almost no fresh water. The air was filled with sulfur fumes. Some soldiers fainted from heat exhaustion and were dragged out, only to return hours later because manpower was too valuable to rest. By early 1945, more than 11 miles, 18 kilometers, of tunnels connected defensive points across the island. Pillboxes were reinforced with concrete, mixed from volcanic ash, some with walls over 4 feet thick, tough enough to survive direct hits from battleship guns. Whole artillery positions were buried and angled to fire through hidden slits in the rock. Anti-aircraft guns were camouflaged in cliffs. Tanks from Colonel Baron Nishi's regiment were dug in up to their turrets and used as stationary gun positions. Many of these positions had multiple exit routes connecting to alternate bunkers and firing chambers. If a pillbox was destroyed, the defenders simply reappeared somewhere else. Some Marines would later describe it as fighting ghosts. American bombers began hitting the island 7 months before the invasion. They raided Iwo Jima for 74 straight days, dropping thousands of tons of bombs. Naval gunfire followed, blasting the surface with almost 22,000 shells. From above, it looked like complete destruction. Airfields cratered, buildings gone. But aerial reconnaissance couldn't see what Suribachi had built beneath. The Japanese soldiers stayed quiet during the bombardment, sheltering underground. One veteran wrote afterward, "It sounded like the island was screaming. But inside the tunnels, we felt no pain. We waited for the real war to begin." By mid-February 1945, the island looked obliterated from the air. But the defenders were ready, buried deep, well-positioned, and waiting for the moment the enemy stepped onto the beach. February 19, 1945. At 8:59 a.m., the first wave of U.S. Marines hit Iwo Jima's volcanic shores. More than 30,000 Marines landed in the opening hours, expecting fierce beach resistance like they saw at Tarawa or Saipan. But the approach was met with strange quiet. No mass gunfire, no artillery. Some Marines thought the bombings had wiped out almost all defenders. That silence lasted less than half an hour. General Suribachi watched through forward observation slits deep within the tunnels. He waited until the beaches were packed shoulder to shoulder with troops and vehicles bogged down in loose black ash. When the kill zone was full, he gave the signal. At exactly 9:30, every concealed weapon opened fire at once. Artillery, mortars, heavy machine guns, anti-tank guns. Some shells were so precise that Marines later said it felt like the enemy had measured every step before they took it. Within seconds, the beach turned into what they called a meat grinder. Marines sank knee-deep into hot volcanic sand, struggling for movement, while gunfire tore through them faster than they could react. More than 500 men were killed, and 1,800 wounded on the first day alone. Landing craft burned along the surf as flames spread through the oil-slicked water. Bulldozers and Shermans tried to carve escape paths through the ash, but many were destroyed before they reached cover. Medics worked under constant fire, half crawling, half dragging wounded over terrain that offered no protection. And still, no counterattack came that night. Marines braced for traditional Japanese banzai charges, suicidal frontal rushes used throughout the war. But none arrived. Instead, Suribachi stuck to his plan. Maximum damage before death. No wasted lives. He forbade banzai attacks so fiercely that officers were threatened with execution if they ordered one. A captured Japanese message that evening read, "Let them bleed as they climb. Do not throw lives away in the sand. Kill 10 for each man lost. Do not give them the honor of an easy death." The Marines had landed, but the real battle had just begun. The fight for Mount Suribachi began on February 20th, the day after the landings. Suribachi dominated the southern end of Iwo Jima. From here, Japanese spotters could direct deadly artillery onto the beaches below. Marines called it a volcano with eyes. Even damaged tanks could still act as range markers. Every crater, every ridge, every exposed unit was under constant observation. The 28th Marine Regiment led the attack. Progress was measured not in miles, but in feet. Heavy flamethrower teams advanced first, spraying bunkers and cave entrances. Explosive charges were tossed into tunnel mouths. Japanese defenders vanished into hidden passageways, then reappeared behind Marines or from elevated firing slits. Some tunnels were 2 or 3 levels deep, able to withstand direct hits from naval shells. One Marine described it as, "You'd wipe them out in one spot. Then they'd be firing at you from behind." It was like fighting ghosts inside rock. The volcanic sand made everything harder. You couldn't dig proper foxholes. Grenades bounced and rolled back toward you. Vehicles overheated. Flamethrower units, who were prime targets, suffered over 90% casualty rates. But without them, progress slowed to almost nothing. For 3 brutal days, Marines advanced through sulfur pits and jagged rock under relentless sniper fire. Some tunnels were so hot that rifles jammed, and water rations ran out before noon. Marines fought in gas masks in some areas due to toxic fumes. Resistance was fanatical but precise. No wasted attacks. Each Japanese soldier had been ordered to kill 10 Americans before dying. Many came close to that number. On February 23rd, a small patrol reached the top. At 10:20 a.m., they raised a small American flag. Across the island, Marines cheered. Ships blasted their horns. Men cried openly, even while taking fire. Later that day, a larger flag replaced it. The moment captured by Joe Rosenthal's camera. That photograph would define the Marine Corps. But what most never knew was this. The battle on Suribachi was not over. Beneath the raised flag, Japanese soldiers continued fighting deep in the tunnels for weeks. Some made final stand attacks. Others simply sealed themselves inside, dying by starvation or suffocation rather than surrender. The flag on the mountain symbolized victory. But beneath it, war still breathed in the dark. If Suribachi was the curtain raiser, the northern strongholds were the main act of horror. Kuribayashi knew the beaches would fall. He knew the mountain could only delay the inevitable. So he placed his ultimate defensive system across the northern highlands. Jagged rock ridges, ravines, interlocking bunkers, and tunnels so complex that even surviving Japanese soldiers later said many areas were never fully mapped. The Marines named each position like something from a nightmare. Meat Grinder, Bloody Gorge, Turkey Knob, Hill 382, Amphitheater. Those names weren't invented for effect. They were earned by blood. On February 25th, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions simultaneously pushed north. Progress slowed to less than 50 yards per day. Japanese troops refused to fight above ground unless forced to. They waited in reinforced blast chambers, often 40 to 60 feet underground, emerging only to fire and fall back. A destroyed bunker in the morning might be manned again by nightfall. One Marine wrote, "We killed them. Then they came back. We blew the tunnels. Then more came out of holes we didn't even know existed." Tunnel warfare tactics evolved rapidly. Marines used flamethrowers to force oxygen out of chambers, followed by demo charges to collapse them. Naval engineers pumped gasoline through cracks in the ground and ignited it. Talcum-fine volcanic ash made explosions unpredictable, sometimes creating firestorms, sometimes just kicking up toxic dust. On average, it took 5 hours to capture a single bunker, and even then, Marines expected counterfire from another angle. Japanese anti-tank guns were hidden in caves, positioned to fire across planned ambush lanes. Mortar teams inside rock pockets could hit exact movement paths because every advance point had been mathematically plotted a month before Marines landed. Flame tanks became the most valuable weapon. Some went through 5,000 gallons of napalm per day. Tank operators said they heard screams underground before silence fell. Many Japanese survivors later said they feared fire more than bullets. By March 7th, American casualties had already exceeded initial estimates for the entire battle. Half of all troops who landed were now wounded or dead. General Kuribayashi's tactics were working exactly as he intended. His men had no illusions of survival, no hope of reinforcement. But they fought with engineered precision, because every hour they bled, the United States was one more hour the home islands remained uninvaded. It was not victory they fought for. It was delay, and delay was killing Americans faster than anyone expected. By mid-March 1945, Iwo Jima had become a place where every inch of progress required blood. The Marines had already taken Mount Suribachi and split the island horizontally, but the true heart of Japanese resistance still remained, an entrenched labyrinth across the northern plateau. The volcanic ash that once made movement difficult now became soaked with rain and blood, turning every low area into a mud trap. Marines described it as fighting on the surface of Mars. Only Mars would have been easier. Japanese defenders operated like shadows. They rarely died where they fired. They shifted through concealed crawl tunnels, moved ammunition via hand lines, and waited to counterattack until Marines exhausted themselves clearing a position. One officer described his frustration in a letter. "We cleared 10 caves in a day. At night, 5 were occupied again. We could never kill them all. We could only bury the entrances and pray it held." Heavy flamethrower tanks, like the M4 Sherman equipped with a high-pressure flame unit, became the most feared tool in the American arsenal. Crews developed tactics of firing 70 to 80-meter flame arcs into tunnel mouths to burn oxygen, cook the interior, and then immediately retract. Survivors were sometimes blasted out by concussion charges. Many did not survive the combination. But Japanese countermeasures evolved too. Some tunnels were fitted with diagonal baffles to break flame penetration. Others had submerged water sections, forcing attackers to change methods. There were even hidden firing positions designed to destroy flame tanks before they reached ideal range. Tank operators had a life expectancy of 10 days. Infantry fought behind them, often wearing 2 or 3 gas masks layered together to avoid inhalation burns. Every night, small Japanese units launched shock infiltration raids, slipping through lines, targeting ammo caches, and destroying field hospitals. Marines slept with weapons tied to their wrists. One survivor said, "The last thing I heard before passing out each night was someone whispering, 'Stay awake, they might come again.' The last thing I heard waking up was gunfire proving they did." By March 25th, the Marines controlled the island, officially. But combat never truly ended until April, when the final tunnel networks were neutralized. In those last days, Japanese resistance collapsed into dispersed survival teams, many choosing suicide over capture. The few remaining strongpoints were eliminated with explosive charges that left craters still visible today. In 36 days, nearly 70,000 Americans were killed or wounded. The Japanese suffered over 21,000 dead, with only 216 captured alive. And yet, even in defeat, Kuribayashi achieved his goal. He delayed the United States. He inflicted heavier losses than expected. He forced a new calculation among American strategists. If this was Iwo Jima, what would invading mainland Japan look like? When the battle officially ended on March 26, 1945, the island lay silent, but nothing about that silence felt like victory. The ground trembled even after the guns had stopped, as demolition teams continued clearing remaining caves with explosives. Marines walked with caution, not celebration. They knew some Japanese soldiers were still hiding, waiting for nightfall to strike once more. One wrote home, "No one here is cheering." We survived Iwo Jima, but we did not walk away from it. Of the over 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 surrendered alive. The rest fell to combat, starvation, or suicide. Some were found clutching grenades to their chests. Others left final writings carved into rock walls. "I fought for the Emperor. I die for Japan. May those who survive remember us." Many preferred death over capture. Some committed seppuku alone in tunnels, rather than step into daylight. For the United States, the cost was staggering. Nearly 7,000 Americans killed, over 19,000 wounded in just 36 days. More casualties than the entire Japanese KIA count. And yet, strategically, Iwo Jima delivered what High Command demanded. Within weeks of capture, the crucial airstrips were repaired. B-29 bombers began using Iwo Jima as a forward emergency landing base during raids on mainland Japan. Over 2,200 damaged bombers made forced landings there by war's end, planes that would have crashed into the Pacific, along with their crews. Each landing represented 11 lives saved on average. In this way, Iwo Jima became not just an island soaked in blood, but a lifeline. But there was another result, a lesson burned into the minds of American generals. If one small volcanic rock required over 25,000 U.S. casualties and nearly wiped out an entire Japanese force before surrender, what would fighting on mainland Japan look like? That question forced a brutal conclusion. Estimates suggested an invasion of Japan could cost up to 1 million American casualties and 5 to 10 million Japanese deaths. It shaped strategy. It accelerated decisions that led to the atomic bomb deployments on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the end, Iwo Jima changed the course of the Pacific War not simply because it was captured, but because of what it revealed: that Japan would fight not for victory, but for delay, honor, and infliction of maximum damage, even when the outcome was certain. As one Marine said decades later, "We didn't take Iwo Jima, we survived it." If you want more untold stories like this, subscribe to No Man's Land, where history's hardest truths are finally spoken.